Rob's Child. Nothing I say is investment advice, and I have no intention to replace content of this book, but to discuss its contents and open it up for discussion. We are now on chapter 38, titled Specific Reasons for Questioning or Rejecting the Past Record. So this piggybacks on our last chapter's idea of unusually large profits being transitory. And so this chapter is supposed to give us an idea of how to look for signs of unfavorable changes in the future. And he says this is easy to illustrate with mines because they have a certain lifespan, they have a certain output, they have a certain cost to produce whatever they're producing, and then there's a certain selling price. And so those four things combined kind of tell how much profit the company can make. And then additionally, the location, character, and grade of the mines can affect it as well. And like later, we'll talk about how new tech affects that as well. Then this section is mostly, it seems, about how there are some examples of mines that have been overpaid for, where investors thought they were going to be making money, and there was too much money put into it, and it didn't turn out into their favor. One point at the end of that section he mentions that I want to bring up is that predicting future commodity prices is like trying to be a prophecy, fortune teller, someone that makes prophecies. And so, he says don't do this. And, it's kind of true. As much as we like to be able to look at industries and say, oh, there's not enough of this being produced, and I think they're going to be using more of this. I mean, a lot of people today, including myself, are particularly excited about copper, silver, uranium, as well as like a lot of the battery technology, lithium, with electric cars becoming more popular. And, again, this is like, it's sort of penetrative, like you mentioned before. It's not completely prophetic. We're seeing an expansion of this area where we've been seeing nonstop governments and institutions coming out and trying to make things more green, and all of these metals are necessary for making that happen. And so but I think the point that I want to make coming from this chapter is that when you are predicting that a commodity price is going to increase in price into the future, you are essentially trying to predict the future, and that oftentimes doesn't turn out well. And so I think Graham, looking at people today, might say be careful in this area. Moving on, basically goes into a point saying basically that new technology can make old methods of companies obsolete. If you have a mine that's using pickaxes when there's machinery that you can operate with levers, and it costs more to use the pickaxes, your old tech in mining can greatly affect the value of the resource that you're producing. And and therefore your profits. And yeah, so there's a bunch about that. It's a fairly short chapter. The other part of this, the second big example of reasons for questioning or rejecting the past record, he's talking about interborough. Basically, I believe it was the first New York subway company, and they had been doing really well for a while. At the beginning, they're making all sorts of money. It was exciting. And then I guess it sounds like New York helped fund the company to build more of them, and the company was selling all these securities saying, oh, look, this is booming, we're making tons of money, the money's gonna keep rolling in. And it didn't. In fact, they ended up going bankrupt because of operation costs being too high, because of the fact that New York, it sounds like the city invested money into it, and they had to get their profits first or something like that. But some of the conclusions were that, it ended up going bankrupt, number one. Number two, this is, he points out, if you ever have a company that has an upper limit of earnings, it can mean that maximum earnings can potentially not be reached. And so just because, I'm not sure how that works exactly, but I imagine it goes something like, there's only a certain amount capacity of people that you can transport every day. So there's sort of a cap on the earnings, but that doesn't mean that those earnings are necessarily going to come in, apparently, from operating costs and other things. They ended up not even being able to pay off their debt, never mind the preferred shares. And he says there in one spot too that the common shareholders, it was estimated at early on in figuring this out in the first few years that they wouldn't be able to get any profits for 30 years. So again, short chapter, some good lessons, and that's all for chapter 38. Thanks for watching. Rob's Child.